Welcome to the Disneyland with Kids podcast, where we help you plan vacations in 30 minutes or less. Planning a SoCal vacation? Our partners have deals on Disneyland and more. From theme park tickets to hotel stays, they have you covered. Visit disneylandwithkids.info/book to price your next vacation.
Hey friends, it's Becca here. Just a quick note that this podcast episode was recorded on the morning of October 19th. And of course, later that day, we were alerted that guidelines for theme parks would be released on October 20th. So you may hear us referencing things like 120-mile radius or locals only. Just know that this was rumored guidelines before the official guidelines came out. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Disneyland with Kids podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about the recent Southern California theme park events that are currently happening and what Disneyland may or could be offering as well. I'm Julie from Mom Rewritten.
And I'm Becca from This Crazy Adventure Called Life.
With Disneyland remaining shuttered for the time being, some of the other Southern California theme parks have shifted slightly in order to partially reopen. For example, with amusement park rides inoperable, SeaWorld was permitted to reopen as a zoo. Knott's is having great success with their recent food festivals, and Legoland California has several events in the works. So we're going to talk about all of those, including their safety protocols. And we can't leave Disneyland out of the mix. So we're going to chat about what they've been able to offer inside the park gates. And we'll even speculate on what they could be doing to get guests back to Anaheim. So Becca, I know you very closely follow the governor of California's restrictions on what can and cannot be opened at this time. So can you give our listeners a brief outline of what Southern California theme parks are doing to comply?
Yeah, I can. It's funny. I probably follow the restrictions for California closer than I do for my own state. California, they are on a tiered, color-coded system, and based on what tier a county is in, then different businesses can open with different restrictions. So I think that's important to understand before we get into this. So for example, in purple, which is the worst tier, dining is only allowed outdoors. However, if a county moves to the red tier, which is, I don't know if you want to call that moving up or down, I'm not quite sure. Indoor dining at that point can happen at 25% capacity or a max of 100 people, whichever is fewer. And so the tier system kind of guides what a business can and cannot do. However, there is an industry that is completely left off of this tier system, and that is theme parks. Actually, they're not left off. I shouldn't say that. But every tier, theme parks are listed as closed, even in the best tier that you can reach, which is yellow. So there are basically no guidelines out there for this industry. And other than maybe concert venues or conventions, they're the only industry that was completely left off. But what was included on these guidelines are zoos, museums, both indoors and outdoors, family fun centers, malls, and theme parks are just a collection of these items, right? Aren't they?
Yeah.
So theme parks such as SeaWorld, they figured, hey, we can open as a zoo. Or Knott's realized they could open everything except the rides and basically be considered a mall. I personally don't know if any of these theme parks actually went to the governor and asked, hey, can we do this? I don't think they did. My guess is they probably were like, look, if we limit it to these items, then we can open this up partially and get people back into our parks. Not every park has done this. Of course, we haven't seen the big ones. We haven't seen Disneyland. We haven't seen Universal. And we haven't seen Six Flags parks do this either. But Legoland, SeaWorld, and Knott's Berry Farm have all done this in some way or another ever since mid to late summer.
It's great that so many of the SoCal theme parks have been able to kind of shift gears and reopen in a way that's safe for their guests and still have employees working. So, Becca, can you talk a bit about the safety measures that these amusement parks are taking for their guests?
Sure. So the basic safety measures that we have they've kind of become universal almost anywhere that you want to go. Um, Temperature screenings, facial coverings, social distancing markers on the ground, lots of reminder signs, physical barriers added places, enhanced cleaning protocols, having hand sanitizer stations everywhere. Some even have added hand washing areas, not just hand sanitizing stations, limiting the capacity. And a big one is most of these items are advanced ticket sales. You can't just show up. SeaWorld, I think, has a little bit of flexibility there where they'll sell few tickets, but in general, you have to make a reservation and purchase everything in advance. It's pretty standard now across the industry of theme parks what you can expect, though there are some variances. I think we're gonna get into a little bit later about like facial coverings and things like that.
Yeah, so we'll get into more of this discussion later, in particular the facial coverings. But for now, let's get to the good stuff. So, Becca, let's talk about how some of these theme parks have been able to reopen and give us an overview on what they're doing at each location. And then we can dive a little deeper into each offering.
Of course. So SeaWorld started with Zoo Days was the first one they offered. That way they could open as a zoo. And that's the one I attended on the opening weekend. And now they've moved that into kind of the same stuff, but they've made their Halloween Spooktacular. It's got a lot of the same offerings, but also has the fall and Halloween offerings. Like they have the Candy Garden available. Legoland started opening with just Miniland opening, and then when aquariums were allowed to open, they added that. Now they have Halloween and Miniland, the Legoland Build and Play Days. The San Diego Zoo is open. San Diego Safari Park are open, obviously because they fall under the zoo category. And then we have Knott's Berry Farm, who was kind of the first to do this partial opening, and theirs have been food festivals mostly. And so we'll get into kind of the progression in a little bit, but right now they have the Taste of Fall-O-Ween going on.
I am literally kicking myself for not grabbing those Knott's Berry Farm Taste of Fall-O-Ween tickets when they first went on sale, because they went fast.
They did.
So let's chat a bit about Knott's Berry Farm first, because what they've been able to do, even without the thrill rides, has been extremely successful.
Yeah, so Knott's Berry Farm, they were kind of the first ones who started these partial reopenings. And the first event they did was called A Taste of Calico, where they opened only the Old West Ghost Town part of the park in a food festival. This popped up a lot of rumors and speculations among the theme park crowds, the theme park vloggers and bloggers and writers. Is there some kind of weird variance law or anything? But basically they just opened this section of the park and had some food booths, and it was widely popular. Like, people loved it. And so they realized, hey, we could basically do this in the entire park, open everything up except for the rides. So then they did the Taste of Knott's event, which had the food festival, plus you could also shop in the park. Again, widely popular. And with those, you had like a 2 to 4 hour window. I believe it was a 4-hour entry window. So now they have Taste of Fall-O-Ween, which sold out, as you mentioned, almost immediately. Like, it was up, posted, and gone really quick. With your admission, we'll talk about Taste of Fall-O-Ween because it's the one that's currently going on, and you get the most for your admission. You get a tasting card. So that's your admission, basically what you're paying. And it's $35 for adults, which includes 5 tastings, and the junior cards are $20 and include 3 tasting. And most people say this makes it worth the cost alone, just the food part. But the event has Halloween offerings, trick-or-treating, and it lasts 8 to 9 hours. So when you break it down, you're paying less than $5 an hour, even at the shorter 8-hour events. That's a really good deal. And plus, like the following, like we said, you get to trick or treat. There's trick or treat trails, and guests get to wear costumes. So it's a great way to be able to celebrate Halloween, where a lot of places in California are not allowing traditional trick or treating.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people everywhere are looking for fall activities that they can do safely with their families. And of course, anytime the kids can dress in costume and trick or treat, it's a good day. And anytime I can get Knott's famous boysenberry pie, it's a good day. But unfortunately, every date has sold out. So if Knott's holds holiday event, which I'm sure they will, you better jump on those tickets immediately. I think I'm going to for sure. Several other SoCal theme parks are holding their own Halloween events too. Becca, you were recently at SeaWorld for their Zoo Days event, and I was there a few weeks ago for their annual SeaWorld Halloween Spooktacular. So, what can you tell us about how SeaWorld has been able to reopen to guests?
They opened as a zoo, which was very interesting. At first, they weren't able to open the aquariums, the indoor aquarium part when I went. So that wasn't offered. That's now been added as long as San Diego County stays in the red tier. But basically, they opened up all of their touch pools. They opened up their shows, which shocked me, and I'll get to that in just a minute. And then they also had food offerings available. And so when we went for Zoo Days, you got a tasting or I guess it was called a tasting pass that had 6 stamps in it that you could go and get 6 food items throughout the day. And I felt that it was worth it for the food alone. Now, I think that we have a little different opinion on the food. Apparently, your food offering was either not as good or maybe you're
Mm-hmm.
used to better food than we were from them. But we thought the food was really good. And we actually, at the end of the day, we brought home bags of food because we had so much food. And I don't know if they changed it between your visit and mine, but like when we went, a kid's meal was just 1 stamp, and our kids still had 6 stamps to use. Now, adults, an entree was 1 stamp, a side was 1 stamp. But with us having 3 kids and them being able to get a kid's meal for 1 stamp, it made it so we were able to get tons of food and bring it home. And we fed ourselves for our entire Southern California vacation off of the food from SeaWorld. It was really great. They had things that surprised me that they did really well, like the shows. I was so worried about the shows and the crowds, but it was done so well. They had every other row was not allowed to be seated in. They had markers every 3 feet, so you could kind of guess your distance from the group next to you. They exited row by row, had people lead you. I mean, it was done so well. I was very, very impressed with that. What I was not impressed with was the touch pools.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you had the same experience. People were just so excited. And I was like, oh, maybe it's because it was the first weekend they were open and people are just so excited to get to do something. But since you had the same experience, I think we can agree that this is a problem. And not just people are so excited about those touch pools. They didn't keep their space. While there were markings on the ground, there was no physical barrier to kind of remind people, hey, stay away, no plexiglass, nothing like that. And people would just get right up on you, bump on you, kids climbing over other people. I mean, it was pretty bad in the morning. It was much better in the evening as we left. We stayed all day, and as we were leaving, it was a lot better. But yeah, what was your experience, Julie?
Yeah, I completely agree. We had the same experience. It was more crowded in the afternoon and less so in the evening just before we were ready to leave. There are a lot of people just forgetting to maintain their space. And I cannot just blame it on the kids because I stepped back to watch my kids and take pictures, and there were grown-ups by themselves just bumping elbows with my kids. I thought, they're just not even paying attention. They're just so interested in touching the bat rays that they weren't paying attention to maintaining their space. So yeah, physical barriers would definitely be helpful. And while I received complimentary media tickets for the day, I did purchase my own meal pass. And I know you said you enjoyed the food. It was very different than what I'm used to having at SeaWorld. They usually have extremely fresh food. This was all pre-boxed, and so it was under heat lamps. They were not preparing anything fresh, and literally we had cold food. And so it wasn't the experience that I was hoping for based on previous food festivals that they had, and they're not touting this as a food festival like Knott's is. I think that Knott's is preparing things more freshly, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
but SeaWorld is not. They're not doing it like they've done with previous festivals. This was just kind of like an add-on as far as the food, and it's just more like a grab and go. Everything is pre-boxed and I didn't care for it. So that was.
So I have a question then, Julie, because
Mhm.
so ours was pre-boxed, but I think because it was maybe it was because it was opening weekend, basically everything got made fresh. Like it was made and then boxed right in front of
Yeah.
us. But my question is, you mentioned you had to buy the meal tickets. So when I went, the meal tickets were included in admission. So for the Halloween time, are those not included with the general admission
No.
for guests then?
No, you can choose to purchase food separately. You can choose to purchase no food. You don't have to buy
Okay.
food, or you can buy that meal pass. That's what I bought, and it ends up being a pretty decent price. But you can also buy alcohol with it too, so that might be a better value if you have a beer drinker in the
Yeah.
family. I think it averages out to around $6 an item.
Okay. Okay.
So let's move on to Legoland. I know you recently stayed at the Legoland Hotel, and the theme park offered the guests something special. So, can you tell us more about this and also what Legoland has coming up?
So yeah, when I stayed at Legoland, it was right before aquariums were given the go ahead to open. So their aquarium was closed, their theme park was closed, but they did something interesting where they opened the original Legoland Hotel, not the Castle Hotel, and it's really cheap. And I just looked, and these prices are still going on for the rest of this year. Like we're talking 167 a night, which is unheard of at the Legoland Hotel. And with that, we were able to access Miniland for free, which is where all of the buildings and things, of all the where they've done built New York City and New Orleans and all of that. So we were able to access that for free. If you were not a guest, you could spend $25 at the big shop, which is not hard to spend $25 on Legos. And then you could also access Miniland for free. And it was really cool. We stayed there, and then they had where we could reserve the heated pool, and they do reservation times that were an hour long. And because they didn't have the Castle Hotel open, you could reserve either the Castle Hotel pool or the Legoland Hotel pool. So we actually went over to the Castle Hotel pool, and when you do that, you get to walk through the Castle Hotel. So we did get to see the inside of the Castle Hotel and swim over there and enjoy that time. But they've now since come up with a lot more things. Like I said, they're able to open their aquarium, so they have a really good deal on the aquarium tickets. It's like $10 per person to go to the aquarium, and I think it's cheaper if you're staying at the Legoland hotels. And then they opened for Halloween. They did Halloween in Miniland, which includes access to Miniland and their own little trick or treat and that kind of stuff there. And because we know that many people will be listening to this and not able to plan a Halloween visit, they also have build and play days coming up in November. What's really interesting about the Legoland stuff is as I was researching these offerings, I saw that they have a ride open. Actually,
Hmm.
a couple. They have, they're I guess they're they're going a bit further than the other parks have gone, and they're now looking at how family fun centers can open at certain limitations. So, like, go-karts are able to be open, and so they're opening, their ride where you drive around in a car, and this is gonna come into play when we talk about Disneyland. So, it was just interesting to
Hmm.
me. They're opening their free play area. I'm guessing because California has released guidelines for playgrounds, they're able to do that now, but that was really interesting. What are your thoughts on those added things like the ride and the playground?
It's very interesting that they have been able to flex and change so quickly. I think Legoland, maybe being a smaller park, and the fact that they have those things available, they're really being creative with how they can reopen. And kudos to them if they can get enough people to come in there and still maintain the social distance and still have the capacity. I think it's great.
Yeah. One thing I will say about Legoland is, like I said, now only we only got to access Miniland when we went, but I was really impressed with them when we went, because in Miniland, like, you have all these little buttons you push to make certain Legos do something, right? So one might start a boat going, another one might start something like a Ferris wheel going or something, right?
Mhm.
But next to every single button, there was hand sanitizer, like right there. They did
Oh, so they
not play.
actually, I was wondering if they actually had the buttons still working or if they would have covered those up or something, but that's great that they still had them functioning.
Yeah, so they had them functioning, and then you just had hand sanitizer right there that you could put on after. And when we went, of course, like I said, none of the other stuff had opened yet. So it was still very empty. Like, there was us and one other family in the entire mini land. So,
Mhm.
um, like, it wasn't crowded at all, but it was great. I'm sure it's more crowded now.
So in the case of Knott's, SeaWorld, and Legoland, they've really had to be creative with their reopening strategies since they've not been able to run their thrill rides. But the San Diego Zoo and San Diego Safari Park have been able to reopen with little modifications made to their usual offerings. Can you tell our listeners what changes they might expect to see at the zoo?
Yeah, the zoo and the safari park are both open. Now, the biggest thing I think that people need to know is that there's no reservations required. So, this is something you could decide the day before to do, but and we'll get into a little more tips on this later. But also expect um temperature screenings, of course, and you must wear your face coverings. So that's just a anywhere in California when you're in public, that's part of the mandates, is that you have to wear a face covering. It's not something put in place by location. They also are limiting the shows, the shopping, the dining, and the transportation. So you won't have everything available. Like, I don't know what they call their bus ride, but there's a bus ride we do when we go to the San Diego Zoo that takes you around. That may not be available, or it may be very limited. So just expect that you may not get to do those extra little things. But as far as a zoo, I mean, you're still going to get to do the zoo activities you would expect when going to a zoo.
So you touched on this earlier about limited capacity inside the theme parks, and some of them require reservations that are date specific in order to control crowd levels. However, the zoo doesn't do this, and you can just show up on any day you wish. But it's important to note that weekend wait times to enter the zoo could be upwards of 3 hours to get inside.
Wow, yeah. I just looked while you were saying this, and they say on the website they've updated this to say 3.5 hours or longer. So long waits. Let's talk about lines. That's longer than any. I never wait in a 3.5 hour line, even for a brand new ride. So um, arrive
Mhm.
early for sure. That's something we're going to recommend to you. Check the zoo's website to see what time the gates open, and be sure to be there early. I mean, this is like probably you need to be there earlier than when you're trying to hit road drop for Disneyland, I think. Just be
Yeah.
there as early as you can. Second, we do suggest pre-purchasing your tickets through our affiliate partner Getaway Today. We'll put that link down in the show notes. They often have a little bit of a discount, and sometimes, they have their peace of mind plan, which I would definitely suggest purchasing if they offer it for these tickets. But it'll save you a little bit of money. So it's not as hard to wait in line when you aren't paying as much, I think, knowing that you got a discount.
So, Becca, now that we talked a little bit about each of those destinations, we're going to swing back in the conversation about safety, because I think this is an extremely important subject for a lot of our listeners. And you brought up facial coverings earlier as a mandate for all public areas in California. This is a touchy subject. And I know there are a lot of our Disneyland with Kids Facebook group members who have said they won't return to the theme parks until masks are no longer mandatory. In doing our due diligence in regards to each of these SoCal destinations, we have all researched this subject deeply, and some of the amusement park guidelines vary when it comes to masks. So, Becca, can you tell us about the facial covering mandates at the theme parks?
In general, the minimum age, this is the a little bit of the controversy. So it's age 2 and up, which a lot of people are like, my 2-year-old will not wear a mask. And so that's one of the controversies, and we're not going to get into whether that's the right age to start or not. But one of the biggest differences, though, that I think we need to talk about is the type of masks, because this varies greatly. Like, I didn't allow my husband to even bring his neck gaiter, which we don't use anymore anyways, because there's different science that's come out, but that's not the type of podcast we are, so we're not going to get into that. But I said, no, you can't wear a neck gaiter because Downtown Disney does not allow neck gaiters or bandanas or anything like that. It has to be an actual mask. They even have language that it needs to be 2 layers thick, have loops that go around your ears. There can be no holes, vents, anything like that. They're pretty strict with the type of mask you're allowed to wear in Downtown Disney. And I thought that was going to be about the same across the board. But no, SeaWorld, they allowed neck gaiters. They allowed
Mhm.
bandanas. So definitely look into each theme park that you're looking at visiting and see what their requirements are. And like you mentioned, some people don't want to go back while masks are required. And that is definitely an option. We are not saying you need to travel right now, but just know that for the foreseeable future, masks will be required at theme parks for all guests ages 2 and up.
Now, required is one thing, but compliance is another. And since you and I have both been to SeaWorld recently, let's start there. So, how did you feel about mask compliance, Becca?
Oh, I just felt, and I wrote this in an article I wrote when I came back, it was not great. So we've seen, I went into this being like, it's going to be so great. Masks are required in California anytime you're in public, so people are going to be used to it. Um, a lot of people with their masks around their chin, mask under their nose, um, and then also walking around holding an item of food or water and having their masks down, not while they're eating, they're just holding something, so they had them down. And it was really jarring to me, and I was actually very disappointed. They didn't have, they call what we would call cast members at Disneyland, they call them ambassadors at SeaWorld, and they weren't out asking people to put their mask back on. I thought, because when we first went in, we went to a show, and I was so excited because it was the Sea Lion show. And so not only did on the pre-show did every ambassador and trainer have a mask on, but even the little dummy that the guy dances with, he's got a doll dummy thing he dances with, they put a mask on that. And I'm like, oh, they're going to be great at enforcing masks. They had a loop playing, reminding people they had to wear masks. But once you left the shows and you were out in the park, there was nobody out there asking for people to put their masks on or put them on correctly, which I was a little disappointed in.
Yeah, I agree. It was really hot on the day that we were at SeaWorld, and I'd say that as the day wore on, mask compliance was about 50% by the time we left the park. I just saw a lot of people with their masks under their chins, a lot of kids not wearing them at all, definitely kids that were older than 2 years old. And it was disappointing, and there just wasn't enough employees, I think, even to ask. I think that the staffing was pretty low, but this was mostly in areas where there was social distancing. So people were spread out, and I think they were just taking their masks off because there was nobody else around for the most part, except they wouldn't even attempt to put their masks on when we would walk past them. So that did bother me. So what about Downtown Disney? Because you went there as well.
So Downtown Disney has made it pretty clear that they're not playing around when it comes to masks. Like I
Mhm.
mentioned, they have very strict guidelines to what is considered a mask. They've gone back and forth. I don't even know today, as we record this, if there's even a medical exemption. For a while, they said no, and then there was a yes for certain people, and I think they're back to no. I'm not sure, but they're very strict on their guidelines, and they will remove you if you do not follow the mask guidance. They have people everywhere saying, put the mask over your nose, make sure you're wearing your mask properly. The only exception, of course, is when you are seated and eating. And this is where Disney has spelled it out. They are like, if you are eating or drinking, you have to be stationary. And we saw this develop from Walt Disney World, right? People were going to Disney Springs, which is much
Mhm.
bigger than Downtown Disney, and going to the parks in Florida, and they were saying, walking around with their water bottle or their drink or their churro so that they could have their mask off. And Disney got wise to it very quickly, I might add, and said, nope. If you're going to be eating or drinking, you also have to be stationary. So we did eat in downtown Disney. We ate outside at Black Tap because my kids had never had Crazy Shakes. So we had to make a stop there. I don't know what everyone else is doing, but Black Tap even had signs on the table asking that you please leave your mask on until after your food had been delivered and the waiting staff had left.
Oh,
so
that's reassuring.
Did everyone follow that? No, but that's still really great that they had that there to give that direction. They also have plexiglass in between all the booths, everything like that. Of course, eating is not the only thing to do in downtown Disney. So the World of Disney, the Disney Home Store, all of the shops down there are very popular. These all have basically text waiting lists. So make sure if you're going to downtown Disney that you get on these lists. We went and we got on World of Disney first thing. We got on the list at right about 10:15, I'd say we were on the list, and we said, well, let's go get in line for Black Tap when it opens. By 10:45, we had a text saying we could go in. We ended up eating first. So one thing I want to mention, Julie, these text messages and these virtual queues, they're not like Rise of the Resistance, right? Where you have to come back within an hour or two of the time it texts you. You don't get it's not like a fast pass where you have to come back during your window. These are really nice because they're open-ended. Once you get that text, you can finish eating your meal. You can do whatever else it is that you're in the middle of doing, and then you can return to the return line when you're ready. Downtown Disney has become pretty darn popular. Do you follow Disneyland Today and their tweets and how often they've had to shut off parking and the pedestrian access?
Yeah, that's kind of why I haven't made the trip up there yet, because I'm a little worried that I'll drive up there and then it will be closed.
It's a little disheartening for anyone that can't get there within 5 minutes, I think.
Yeah.
So it's gotten really popular. And I will say this is one of the places that I actually had a little bit of a panic attack because I had been so socially distanced until this time, right? It was weird to be in this place. And let's be clear, like we're not doctors, we're not scientists, but the information is out there that just passing someone outdoors at an outdoor mall is not that big of a risk. However, when you have not done anything, it feels like, oh my gosh, there's too many people. What are we doing? So Disney realized that they are popular. And so they're like, you know what we need to do? We need to offer more. Still not opening any of the parks yet, but they are allowing us within California Adventure Park proper. We're actually inside of the gates, though we don't walk through those front gates to get there. They have opened stage 17 for shopping, and it offers it's really cool because it offers a lot of stuff that's at not just World of Disney, but you have stuff from the different shops in this one area that you can go shop at. I have not been, but Jessica, one of our co-hosts, she is in California right now as we're recording this. So I'm wondering if she's going to visit and try and get inside there. But I'm excited just that they have something within the parks now.
That gives me one more reason to visit. Not that I needed one, but Becca, why do you think that Disneyland hasn't reopened in one of the modified ways that the other area theme parks have done?
This is what's really interesting. And this is why a lot of vloggers and bloggers have been like, oh, is it because of there's some loophole that not's found out? Is there, I think it just comes down to money. What is the price point? It's a lot. They're a bigger park. Their price point, their operating costs are a lot different. And I just don't know if they have wanted to try and figure out how to open partially, but I think they should because I want to go.
So if we don't see a reopening date in sight soon, what would you love to see Disneyland do on a short timeline?
I'd love to see them bring back the Food and Wine Festival in California Adventure by spreading out the kiosks throughout the entire park. I really think they could do that well. And there's probably a lot of people like me that have a full Sip and Savor pass that they have not used. And they would love that chance to use it. That leads to the problem, though. If they have all these people with full Sip and Savers, how do you make money off of that, right? Because you like knots, that's included with your admission costs. So how do you do that? I just think if they opened it up for just the dining and the restaurants, the shopping, I think people would come. Because I know when I went to downtown Disney, I was in such a need of a Disney fix. And we talked about this on our souvenirs episode, Julie, that I was like, take all of my money. I will buy everything. And I'm usually not like that. I think if they were to just say, hey, we're only opening our outdoor dining that's within the parks, and we are opening the shopping, I think people would be in heaven. And there's lots of things, then they could add those socially distant character passings, have characters out on rafts on the rivers of America, or, up above on the Golden Horseshoe, you could put some characters. And so there's a lot that they could do. And then this got me to thinking with Legoland, how they have their driving a car experience open. Could we open Autopia? Could we open the Mark Twain as a river boat ride experience? I don't know. I think there's a lot that they could explore. I think the biggest thing for them is figuring out what's the price point, and if it's going to help them or hurt them, and how they address this with annual pass holders, because they do have such a large local annual pass holder group.
Absolutely. I think any of those things would bring back the locals at the very least. And there has been some speculation that when Disneyland first reopens, it might be limited to those in residence within a certain radius of the park. No other theme parks have been given that restriction. So what do you think about that, Becca?
I have mixed feelings, and I'm going to try not to get political. That's not what we're about here. I understand where the governor is coming from if he wants to put a radius, because it is a large tourist attraction for Disneyland and Universal. However, you are already allowing people into your state. To think that putting this, that's where I have the problem with the 120-mile radius. I feel he'd be better to just put a quarantine in effect, that if you come from out of state, you have to quarantine for 14 days. I feel that's more effective, because I went, other people have commented in many groups and Disney forums and Twitter, the amount of out-of-state license plates at the beaches and other places, people are still visiting California. I totally respect his thinking on why you would want to keep it local, to keep people from being tourists. But at the same time, that's not going to help what's going on with the economy in Anaheim, to open it up to only locals as well, because the hotels are going out of business. So I'm just glad I'm not a governor anywhere. I'll just put it that way. Whether you agree with it or not, it's a really hard position to be in. I don't know if I agree with the 120-mile radius, because I don't think there's this magic line around that makes it safer. I just think that there's a better way to do that to protect your entire state. And like I said, I'm just glad I don't have to make these decisions.
Yeah, so many hard decisions and so much to think about. So, okay, well, we always end our podcast with a would you rather question. So let's get to it. And since it's fall when we're taping this, I'm going to ask a Nightmare Before Christmas themed question. Naturally, we're missing this Disneyland ride either way. But Becca, would you rather ride Haunted Mansion in the usual way or the seasonal makeover Haunted Mansion Holiday?
I love them both. I'm actually not a big Nightmare Before Christmas fan, but I do love the seasonal overlay. But I'm going to have to go with the original, just because at the end of the seasonal version, the Nightmare Before Christmas version, it's weird to have a stocking show up as what's going home with you, or a present, or a candy. No matter how Halloween, like Jack Skellington version of this stocking, it's just not the same as having a ghost ride in your doom buggy with you and follow you home. It's weird. If they would just change that one part, I would be very happy, because it's just weird. What about you, Julie?
I like them both as well. And I'm not sure I actually got through Haunted Mansion, the original, with my eyes open until I was probably 18. I am serious. It scared me. So I think if you've got younger kids, they're really going to love Haunted Mansion Holiday, because it's a little more joyful, to be honest. It's a little more colorful and bright. So I'm kind of torn either way. just like you.
Well,
Well,
hopefully next year we'll get to ride them both.
that's right. So that is it for us today. And we thank you so much for joining us. You've been listening to Becca and Julie discussing the Southern California theme park, recent events, and what we'd love to see happening at Disneyland.